Gian will be speaking again later, so if you want to listen more about her, then please stay and then listen to her again. Next up, we have another speaker from ZK Land. Please welcome Jane.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm the fifth talk or the fourth talk of the day, so I'm sure I'm going to try to make this as short and as engaging as possible. But today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about building dreams on Starknet. And what it really means is I'm going to break up my talk into two parts. First is just in terms of the evolution of Starknet. And then the second part is how we as ZK-Len have woven into the narrative and really adapted to the growth of the network. So before I start, let me talk a little bit about myself first. I'm Jane, and I'm one of the co-founders of ZK-Len, alongside Brian, who spoke earlier today. There's actually three of us, Jonathan, Brian, as well as myself. And we have been at it on the project since end of 2021. Feels like a lifetime ago, because so much has happened in the space. But previously I did work in TradFi institutions. Right out of college, I worked at Credit Suisse, and then I decided the banking life wasn't for me, so I went to work at a startup called Deliveroo. It's kind of like the Grab food equivalent in Hong Kong, and ended up really loving it. Really loved the startup culture, all hands on deck environment. And that's really when I decided after a while that, hey, I want to go to an even smaller startup, and I want to be able to combine some part of my financial background with something like starting a project. And so at ZK-Len, some of the things that I focus on, or I'm not too bad at, include things like product market fit, marketing, as well as strategy and partnerships. But yeah, so setting the stage of what I'm going to talk about next is, for those who are quite familiar with Starknet, Starkware, StarkX, maybe you can tune out this part. But I find it generally very helpful because people throw around terms like StarkX, Starknet, Starkware without really understanding the difference. So Starkware is actually the SaaS company that has built the technology for Starknet and StarkX. It was founded by 4 people, 2 of whom may look familiar. This is Uri, who's the CEO of Starkware, and this is Eli, who's the president of Starkware. And it is an Israeli SaaS company that was started by a bunch of scientists who specialize in zero-knowledge cryptography. Eli was actually the founder of Zcash as well, so a privacy-preserving coin that is currently being used as well. But StarkX, this is when things get interesting. How many of you have heard of DYDX or Immutable X? Great. I actually heard about DYDX and Immutable X before I even understood what StarkX was, because I was able to trade perps at a fraction of the cost, but what I didn't realize is it was powered by this engine called StarkX, which is a layer 2 solution. And how is it actually different than something like Starknet is that StarkX is like an independent engine that is tailor-made to different applications. So, for example, if I'm trading on DYDX, I'm saving a ton of gas because things are super cheap, but I also want to trade an NFT on Immutable X. I'm actually not able to jump between these two engines and communicate between these two, these two protocols. So while the beauty of StarkX is you get scalability and it's built on top of Ethereum, one thing that is certainly lacking is composability. You're not actually able to use different applications on StarkX. They all kind of live in silos. But nonetheless, obviously StarkX has had a very impressive track record. They've settled 980 billion worth of transactions. Wow, TVL is at like 525 million. I think Starknet is at like 60 something right now. So it's super impressive. And they went live back in 2020. So they're definitely one of the earlier scaling solutions on Ethereum. And finally, Starknet. So as I mentioned earlier, StarkX is kind of siloed, right? Like you might have StarkX for Diversify, you have StarkX for Immutable, But the whole idea of Starknet is to create a general composable layer 2 where applications are actually able to talk to one another. So if I bridge my funds from Ethereum onto Starknet, I can trade on zkLend. And then I can deposit on zkLend, and then I can trade on something like Jedi Swap, and then I may be able to mint an NFT on Aspect or Mint Square without even doing any kind of additional bridging. So a little timeline in terms of how this all kind of pulls together very nicely is you'll see that in 2020, that's when StarkX came live. You'll see DYDX, RhinoFi, all these guys. And what's really interesting is that Cairo was actually born out of StarkX in order for developers to be able to write a language for provable computations. Now, having understood the need for a general purpose layer 2, that's when Starknet Alpha came into play in late 2021. So for those of you who may not know, Starknet has actually been on mainnet since late 2021. But they call it mainnet alpha, obviously, because there are a couple caveats to it. A lot of 2021 has been focused on actually building the infrastructure around Starknet. So, for example, are there wallet providers that people can use, like Argent and Bravos? Are there functional bridges where I can actually bridge my money onto Starknet? I know it sounds really simple, but these are actual hurdles that I think Starkware was really navigating at the end of 2021 because they can't build everything themselves, right? They need community, and it was all about attracting these infrastructure and developer initiatives that would build on Starknet. So I would say 2021 would be defined by laying like the lowest level of groundwork. And come 2022, okay, so let me just insert zkLend in here. We decided to build on Starknet at the end of 2021. And I would say we're the first wave of projects alongside a couple guys like Jedi Swap, Brick, a couple projects from Nethermind as well, that really went live on Starknet testnet. Yeah, at the time, I remember in 2022, that was when the first Starknet hackathon took place in Amsterdam. And I think the idea of Empiric, which is now renamed as Pragma, the price oracle for Starknet, was actually like born out of the hackathon itself. So yes, it does pay to be early. And I'll skip ahead a little bit. In late 2022, it was all about performance and decentralization. So now that a lot of protocols have gone live on testnet, what matters the most, right? Making sure that Starknet is actually faster than Ethereum and cheaper than Ethereum. So Starkware actually laid out a roadmap to improve performance. They debuted an upgraded version of Cairo called Cairo 1, which is supposed to be a lot easier for developers to write in because Cairo is a low-level language, and making the syntax very similar to Rust. What they also did is, I'm inserting a new term here, they founded the Starknet Foundation. Now, this is a really important step in all of its development because up until this point, Starkware was the software company that was developing all this technology for Starknet. But eventually, a network needs to distance itself from the company that develops all this technology, right? Because in order for it to evolve and in order for it to be decentralized, you actually need community contributions and community ownership. And that's where the foundation comes in. A couple of key committees also came around, like the Early Adopters Committee, the Onboarding Committee. I'm getting a blank, but anyway, all these committees are being founded to really focus on specific kind of parts of Starknet to help really accelerate growth. And so what I mean by this is, if you're looking for a grant and you're a project looking to build on Starknet, the foundation can now help you, and you know exactly who to go to reach out for these resources. Last but not least, obviously, we're in the first half of 2023 right now. So there are a lot of components that are being rewritten, like the Starknet sequencer, Cairo 1 is now supported, and eventually we are expecting a huge upgrade in terms of transactions per second come, I would say, in a month or two, called Starknet version 0.12. And I think that's really the time when we can expect Starknet to be open for business. I think up until this point, Starknet Alpha, mainnet, that's great and all, but how do we actually show to users that, yes, Starknet indeed is faster than Ethereum, transaction fees are lower. And I really think that come the second half of 2023, that's when users will realize the potential of Starknet. So it was all pretty sunny and bright. So let me talk to you about the problem statement, because we decided to build on Starknet back in late 2021, and certainly had its challenges. Like Gianna mentioned, definitely come in early, build on Starknet, that's great. But also at the same time, there were a couple issues that we faced. The ever-changing technology of Starknet. I'm not a developer, so oftentimes I have to message random people and be like, hey, I don't get this, help me wrap my head around it. And maybe something I understood a month ago is completely different than what my understanding should be 2 months later. And that's certainly challenging, because unless you have a mindset where you're able to kind of break it all down and then you're like, okay, never mind, I'm gonna relearn everything, it's definitely a tough mindset to be in. Second part of it is, it's pretty complex, right? It has pretty complex technical components. Whereas Ethereum, I would say it's not the most straightforward, but on Starknet you have sequencers, you have provers, you have verifiers. There's so many parts to it. And when devs are still learning the different components, how do you actually communicate this to users? Because ultimately, me as zkLend, what do I care about? Yes, I want developers to build on zkLend, but I also want your everyday user to actually start using the protocol. So how do I actually teach them about these parts? And finally, not yet at full potential. It's a little harsh to say, but I guess, again, Starks or ZK rollups have a ton of potential. I don't know, 1% of Ethereum gas, for example, or transaction speed of 100,000. I've definitely seen these numbers being thrown around, but that's not actually the case right now. So how do we actually sell dreams to people on a network that has so much potential, but it's still very much a work in progress? We have two options as zkLend. We could either go hide in a hole and wait until everything is built, and then we'll emerge and we're like, hello, we're zkLend, please use us. And that might save us a lot of time, because we don't need to invest in resources and we don't need to write something in Cairo 0 and then re-audit it. But at the same time, it certainly pays to be early in the ecosystem. And a lot of what we've done, which is what I'll cover in the next slide, actually has nothing to do with zkLend protocol itself. It actually has a lot to do with ecosystem and community growth. But I think that's what makes Starknet so special, because it's not only us at zkLend. Nethermind, for example, they do a lot of community education. And does it really directly have to do with their bread and butter and what they do? Not exactly. But I think that's what makes the community so beautiful. Okay, so I will break it up into two parts. This one is quick. So again, marketing Starknet, there are two parts of it. And actually, I think a lot of the talk today has been about marketing Starknet to developers. We want developers to come into ecosystem, learn Cairo, that's great. And so a lot of what we've done in the early days before we even built the protocol is build developer tooling. And that's exactly what John, our CTO, did. He built the Starknet library in Rust, and he built the Starknet CLI to help other developers who are looking to build whatever they want an easier time to navigate through the ecosystem. And that's not my focus today. Oop. Okay, great. And the second part of it is the retail part. And this is where it gets super challenging, because how do I even talk about zkLend when people don't know about Starknet? It almost feels like our fate is inherently tied to Starknet as a network itself. And so I would say we broke up community growth into three parts before we even had a product. First is on education, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Second part is on partnerships, so working with other folks in the ecosystem. And third are events like these ones, events like Starknet in Singapore, Starknet in Hong Kong meetup, where we would invite people who never heard about Starknet before, or developers or students, anyone who just wants to hear us talk. Great. So a little case study here, and one of my favorite activities that we did, and I'm sure people are sick of hearing us on Twitter, but we launched a Zen and Friends series, and it encompassed probably like 15 to 20 AMAs, and these are two of which I highlighted. Where we invited some really, really cool and important people to break it all down for us, like what the hell are ZK rollups? And the whole idea is it shouldn't be intimidating for like people because maybe it's like targeted towards devs, but I literally want to ask stupid questions like, what are ZK rollups? Why is Starknet different from Matter Labs? And like, why is Scroll like, I don't know, like why is Scroll like a ZK EVM type that's different than Matter Labs, for example. So again, it's about breaking it down into different pieces so that people can actually understand it instead of catering the whole content for developers. And the other Zen and Friends roundtable that Brian actually hosted included Nethermind, Hypernative, around L2 security. So how are L2s safer, or how are L2s designed in a way that are safer than, let's just say, other alternative L1s? And what are some of the, What are some of the openings in which we as a DeFi protocol need to take extra precaution, and how do we prevent this? So we worked with Hypernative, for example, and they're a security company, and they actually help us monitor some of our smart contracts in real time to understand if there are any potential exploits. So these are all, again, I would say a lot of content historically written or catered to developers, but we really try to tailor the content so that everyone can understand it. And this is actually a pretty fun one. It's like not technical at all, but like actually quite fun. So if you look at this, it's like a deer and a duck. Actually, I don't even know. Anyway, and this is something called Zen Ducks. And actually what we did was we worked with a protocol called Brick. And they're kind of like a Lego building protocol where you can just kind of build your own NFTs on Starknet, as well as Ducks Everywhere, which is kind of like a design studio, and they built a collection around Brick. And what we did was we just commissioned 5 designs of these deer ducks, and we gave them to our community, and we said, hey, please take this, download a wallet, actually try to build the set on Brick, break it, maybe sell it on Aspect, and do whatever you like. And the whole idea is, sure, it might involve some kind of ZK-Len element, but for us, it's important for our community to actually understand how to use a wallet in the first place, how to pay for transactions in the first place, before we even start educating them about, hey, earn an interest on ZK-Len. So yeah, so that's really it on my talk today. But what I hope you can take away from this is, as a project, we had 2 choices. We had a choice to really just build right around now. We would have had to write in Cairo 1, could have leveraged a lot of the developer tooling. But what we decided to do is we decided to really build a community that was interested in Starknet and not just ZK-Len alone. And along the way, it's definitely had a lot of challenges, but I think that's what makes Starknet so special. So a little bit more resources about ZK-Len. I think Brian shared this earlier, but we're also hiring, especially developers. And check us out on Twitter, Instagram. We also have a pretty active Discord. And look forward to connecting with you guys. Thank you.